Hello and welcome to Graduate Theory. My guest today graduated university in 1994 from the University of Technology in Sydney with a Bachelor of Business and a Bachelor of Law. In that same year, she started working as a research analyst at investment bank Citigroup, later moving to small company equity sales. After working at Citi for nearly 10 years, she moved to Credit Suisse, where she continued to work with small companies. And in 2006, my guest took a new role as Executive Director of Small Company Equity Sales at Goldman Sachs, 4 years later becoming the Managing Director of that same area. In 2013, she started work as a partner at Reunion Capital Partners, and in 2018, completing her Masters of Coaching Psychology. In early 2020, she started her current coaching brand titled On Purpose. On Purpose supports leaders and teams to effectively operate in today's complex business environment. Teaching conscious leadership, my guest today helps leaders work on their inner game towards self-mastery and wisdom to act with authenticity, integrity, courage, and compassion so that breakthrough performance and results can be achieved. Please welcome to the show the wonderful Lidia Ranieri.
Hi, James. Thank you very, very much for that lovely introduction. And I'm really looking forward to our chat today.
Amazing. Well, it's clear you've had an outstanding career. But one thing I want to ask you first is your coaching brand is called On Purpose. So what does it mean to you to be on purpose?
So the name came to me because I'm trying to think of a business name that captured a number of things. So on purpose to me means doing something on purpose. So doing something with intention. And if you're doing something with intention, then you're doing something consciously. So I wanted to bring that in. But I also wanted to overlay this idea that some stage in our lives, whether it starts in teenage years, for some, whether it starts in early adulthood, we kind of yearn for this connection to our purpose, whatever that may be. And it's this kind of vague thing whenever people have real clarity around their purpose. And it's not something that you can know with your head. It's something that you feel. And so I'm the Masters in Coaching Psychology. I really became interested in working with people to ensure that whatever it is that they're doing, they feel that connection to, yeah, this is right. This is my path. This is what I'm meant to be doing. Or alternatively, when you're in a role and you're doing it for a whole lot of extraneous factors, but inwardly you're suffering, or inwardly you're waking up with that dread of, I just don't want to go in today, or I don't want to do this, then helping people to have the courage to explore with intention and consciously what it is that feels more like their purpose. That was the reason behind the name.
Yeah, I really like that. And that's something that's come up in a few of the episodes I've done so far, is that idea of like almost following your gut in what you're doing. And I guess that comes back to what you were saying. Really, it's something that's kind of hard to describe and something that you never really find it. And when you have it almost, but it's difficult to find that. And following your gut is something that has come up a lot and is something that is quite important. One thing I want to ask you to follow on from that is, are there any steps that you would take to find your purpose? I mean, it's something that is difficult, but what would you say? How can we find that?
So when I work with people to explore this, I had to do a whole presentation on this topic. And so I was putting together the slides for it. And this is sort of one form of doing it with a visual kind of cue. The other is when I'm doing sort of sessions, I sort of encourage clients to sort of link to a place where they can visualize this for themselves. But I threw up a whole heap of images that I'd found of children, probably around the age of 4 or 5. And, one's dressed up as a doctor, and one's dressed up as a superhero, and one's dressed up as a little scientist in a science lab, and the other's standing on a stage singing, and another's ready dance clothes. The reason I threw up these images is because when it comes to our purpose, when we go back and we unravel it, purpose is very strongly linked to two key things. What are our strengths? Well, we love to use our strengths. They're our God-given talents. They're innate. And when we give them expression, it feels really, really good. It feels natural. It feels like we're doing the right thing. So this is linked to strengths and values. What's important to us? What is it that we value? Why does one person value doing a certain thing over another person who values something else? It all leaks into this intricate internal system that has this knowing. So when I threw up those images, or when I kind of encourage clients to come up with these images for themselves, for example, the child who's standing on stage performing, I invite clients to think about a time where they might have had these images for themselves. And the point of the image and the metaphor of the child on stage performing is not, I want to be a singer or an actor or a performer necessarily. It may be, but it is a indicator that something within you really enjoys expressing itself to an audience. So you may need to find a role that allows you to do a lot of presentations, because when you're presenting, you feel on, you feel energized, you feel vital, you love looking at the responses from the people that are sitting in the room in which you are giving your performance. You know, for others, it may be the kid in the science coat. Yeah, they may have curiosity as this burning feeling within them, and they need to work in a way that ignites that curiosity about the world. And so it's those inroads that really link to finding our purpose. And the reason why childhood is a really fertile place to do some of this exploration is because when we see children at play, this has been studied by psychologists, children are very naturally into what we call the flow state. And the renowned kind of researchers and psychologists in this area is a gentleman called Alumni. And he did, a lot of research. Various other psychologists have sort of been in on this area of exploration. But what they found is that when we enter a flow state, we are doing something that is truly engaging, but just challenging enough. And when we get to that place, we can do it for a very long period of time. Time actually doesn't even occur to us. So we kind of go into a timelessness, and we are very focused on the task, and we're not focused on ourselves. And so the flow state is actually the state that we want to get high performing athletes into. It's the state we want to get, functioning corporate executives into. But you can only enter flow state when the activity genuinely engages you, and it's called having some sort of intrinsic motivation around that. So that's why childhood is such an interesting place to start exploring this, because we don't have any of those I should, I ought to, everyone says I must, all those other externalized conditioning statements that create beliefs within us. We are just who we are. And so it enables us to go back and look at, yeah, I really love doing that. Of course, then there's the practicalities of, earning a decent income, etc. You need to sort of to then map some real world stuff over it, and the practicalities of those interior kind of motivational states. But it's a really good place to start to find that purpose.
No, that's really cool. And I think that's something that, as well, that I've heard like from some of my friends that have gone down one path and then changed and gone somewhere else. It was really a process of kind of winding back their life almost to get back to the stage they maybe made a key decision where they decided to, maybe it was to study a certain thing or to pick a certain set of subjects in high school or whatever it was, and then really go, back to almost that crossroads and reassess, was that the right choice there? And then maybe you can try, even though you've got to wind back a little bit, to start going somewhere else that maybe resonates a bit with yourself. So I think that's really interesting.
That's right. I think that life affords us so many opportunities where You come to a crossroads at various stages, and they present themselves at different times for different people. But those crossroads emerge because we're being invited to answer that question. What is it that I really want to do? And the deeper element to that is we think about it as, what do I want to do? Do I want to do this subject or that subject, or this course or that course, or this job or that job? But underlying it, if you dig beneath that surface, it's what part of me needs expression here? What part of me do I want to give expression to in some outer world context where I'm applying myself to that every day? And so knowing what your strengths are, knowing what your
Mm.
values are, can help you to navigate making those decisions so that you're more closely aligned to giving yourself that expression, because that's really what leads to, from a psychological standpoint, that's what leads to fulfillment. That's what leads to life satisfaction. That's what leads to happiness.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool. And just on the purpose and things like that, do you think it's possible to kind of find your purpose like holistically? Or is it kind of this thing where you're kind of getting closer to finding it, but it's this moving target where maybe it's changing over time and you're sort of trying to get closer and closer to it, but perhaps you never really get to that. I guess I know stories of people, and even for myself sometimes, where you think, okay, I'm gonna find my purpose and I'm gonna do this, and okay, yeah, this feels good, I'm gonna keep going, but oh, maybe it's not quite right. Do you think you ever get to that stage where I've found exactly what I'm gonna do? This is it. I finally made it. That kind of stage, or is it almost this moving target situation where you're getting closer to it and finding your way? But yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah. So I think that we burden ourselves with this idea that there is a purpose. Some amazing individuals are born to a purpose, as in one. You might say that you might think that if you think back over the career of, some great sporty person is always a sort of way to understand this. You might think that Michael Jordan was born to the purpose of being one of the best ever ball players the world has ever seen. But then that would rob him of having any purpose now, right? Because he's not doing that anymore. So the way
Mm.
I like to think about it is that we have a purpose, and that may be a staged experience. So my purpose in this role and at this particular time may simply be an apprenticeship. I'm in a learning mode. That's my purpose right now. I'm in a skill acquisition mode. And that mode needs to be aligned with where I have natural interest, where I can develop real competency, because then I feel good about myself. Like I need to be doing something that I can actually see myself improving at. Otherwise, I get demotivated. So, purpose can be, for this moment in time, this is the right place and this is the right role for me. As long as I'm giving the fullest expression to things that make me feel vitalized and engaged. When that has run its course, for reasons we all have experienced, but who can explain it? Over a period of time, you suddenly start waning in your interest. It's like, it's not doing it for me anymore. I'm just not that interested. And that is a sign that it's time for you to move into another phase. It's still your purpose, because life's, as you say, you never get there. What's there? It's just a journey of giving yourself the opportunity to express yourself in your fullest capacity and at the highest functioning level that you can. Some phases of that are learning. Some phases of that might be working on something to prepare it for the next stage. And they're kind of like Lego blocks, right? They build on each other. You may then have a peak experience. And that peak experience, Michael Jordan is an example, that lasts for a number of years. It may be something that, is acclaimed or revered or, of recognized. But maybe it doesn't have an outward recognition. Maybe it's just your own experience of it being like a golden era for you. And then it changes. And then the purpose moves into something else. And so our purpose is interwoven through a kind of a journey where we change in our wisdom, in our experience, in our stage of life also
Mm.
determines, what it is that we're more attuned to. So I like to help people by burdening them of this idea that there's this one thing. There are many paths to getting there, and they may all lead to this. I think everyone wants what we're talking about is that
Mm.
peak expression, that golden moment, and sustaining that. And so ways to then try and, ensure that you sustain it. Like when I talk to executives about, performance and this idea that it's marked by certain externally recognized success kind of factors. And that can be a component of it. But in truth, what peak performance is, some level of optimized functioning. And to arrive at your level of the most optimized functioning, you need to obviously, we're assuming that, you're competent, you're good at what you're doing. That's a given. You have to work to the point where you establish that. But to sustain that really, really highly optimized functioning, we can't be constantly peaking, because when it comes to performance curves, they're kind of like this sloped hill, and they go up gradually and then they drop off really sharply. And at the top of the curve, obviously, is peak performance. And so you're building up to it. And then there's, after your peak performance, there's a little extra sort of the other edge of the hill before you slope down, and that's your stretch zone. And if you don't step back from peak performance and stretch zone and go back down the hill towards the recuperation zone, you can't sustain the peak performance. The other side of the slope after stretch is just overwhelmed, and the performance drops off very rapidly and sharply. And that is exhaustion, burnout, health issues, some kind of physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual crisis, because we can't sustain ourselves in those peaks. So the idea about, being to our purpose, sustaining ourselves in these peak moments is kind of like this dance where we go there, we taste it. Sometimes we have to then go back downhill. And so in the context of purpose, we have these peak moments. We're on fire, everything's going our way, in deals where business is growing, we're working long hours. It's a pleasure. We might work our weekends because we're engaged in some creative process and we're loving it. But after whatever it is peaks in us and in the activity and in the event or in something being delivered, we have to step back and go back. And that's still our purpose. Our purpose can still be in that recuperation zone where it doesn't seem as on, because we're getting ready to be able to re-enter. It'll be a different set of circumstances. It'll be a different set of people, different set of challenges, but it still reignites that fire. But if we don't, you can lose it. It's not lose your purpose, but you can lose your ability to engage with it.
Mhm. That's really, really cool. But when do you, like, you were talking about climbing the hill and getting close to falling off the hill when you get to the top? Are there any, like, how do you know when you're getting to that point? Is there any, it's like, because you're sort of, like, you're at the top, you're in the zone, things are going well, then you are, like you were saying, quite close to working yourself too hard and then crashing. How can we avoid this sort of falling off the back of the hill and rolling back down so we can come back up and sustain that performance for longer?
Yeah. So self-awareness is a huge, huge differentiator amongst people who are able to sustain themselves to some degree, being conditioned to sort of success through what I think is quite a narrow lens. We just look at the outcomes. But we reconsider the markers and the criteria for success, then we can sort of spread the base a little bit. So we can still keep the outcomes as the objective to get this promotion. I want to deliver this project. I want to win this deal. I want to break into this market, whatever. There's the outcome. But if you set alongside the outcome your other intentions, I want to be able to do it and maintain my fitness. I want to be able to do it and still have good relationships with the people that are closest to me. I want to be able to do that and maintain my mental health, giving myself the opportunities to have some mindless moments, right? So because when you're engaged, you're just so on that the mind really does get, utilized. Sometimes even sleep isn't enough, or you may be, falling asleep. So what we need to do is we need to set up other goals that sit alongside the outcome goal. And then you have the opportunity to creatively think about how do you solve for all of those things. If I'm going to go really hard on this, then I need to give myself a day in that week where I just take whatever it is, 20 minutes for a meditation. And I must do that. And when we listen to really high performing people talk, there is a real discipline to performing and recuperating. It's a term that certain surgeons have coined for executives, and they call them corporate athletes. And the difference between professional sporting athletes and corporate athletes is corporate athletes don't have an off season. They don't have a team of masseurs ready to help them condition for their recovery, but they need it just as much. And if you don't structure it into your own performance plan, then that other side of the hill, is loom. Now, youth forgives a lot of ills, and we all know that in youth, you can party really hard and you can go all night, you can get up and do it the next day. But even though that is doable, your performance, you don't actually know how much better you could be with rest, with recovery, with good food, with all the things that go into what we do to support athletes. We also should be doing to support ourselves. We need to think about ourselves in that way. When am I on? When do I need to be really on? And how do I prepare for that performance? Well, I need to take care of my health, sleep, water. Things. It's no different. They're just the difference between an athlete and a corporate athlete is the playing field's different, but the physiological expression of pressure and dealing with the performance demands of your environment, physiologically, it's the same.
That's really cool. And that's a really great analogy, I think, because between the physical, or the athletes, the traditional athletes, I guess, versus the corporate ones, where there, tends to be not really as much of a focus on that recovery and making sure your mental health is okay and working on your physical health, things like that. So I really liked that. Definitely, that's really, really cool. And I guess it's important as you go through your career that you pay attention to these things like we just spoke about, so that you don't burn yourself out and you don't maybe ruin friendships, and that you keep those things in a good place. So that was really cool. One thing I want to ask you too is about the coaching that you do at the moment, coaching these quite high performance people. What are some things that you sit down with them? What are some common, problems that they have, and even what are some common, things that or some tools that you use to kind of extract even higher performance out of them?
Yeah. So, get even more performance out of the high performer. When it comes back to we define high performance, if we're only defining it by outcome, and there are ways, and push yourself harder. You can, in executive context, there are simply ways where you can turn down the volume on everything else in your life and just focus on that outcome. Now, you might get high performance. Question is how sustainable it is. And the question is at what price? So when I work with clients, really, I'm there to facilitate. I'm not there to dictate. It really comes down to what they want to achieve. I might challenge them and question them that, really at the very high executive level, not often surrounded by people who tell them, well, that's a bad idea. Right? They're usually surrounded by people who go, yes, I think that's fantastic. So
Mm.
part of being an executive coach at those high levels is having a safe place to be challenged. It's helping an executive to open up to other perspectives, which they might not otherwise get standard day-to-day role. Getting more performance always comes down to the bedrock of self-awareness. So if you think about, and I use these sporting analogies because it's so easy for us to relate to one, as opposed to me helping you relate to what an executive might face in their day-to-day work. But think about, professional golfers that have to step up to the green and take a shot. In that moment, they've been preparing and preparing and preparing for this moment for years. And the difference between a great shot and a poor shot isn't so much their skill. They're highly skilled at this point. The difference is what in a game. What's your self-talk? Is it positive or negative? Are you telling yourself, oh my God, I'm going to throw this, I'm going to flunk it, I'm not feeling good, or I'm really pissed off with somebody in my life, and I'm allowing that to have traction inside of me in this moment, right? So what's going on internally is the differentiator between the performance in that moment. And that's what applies to executives. So at that level, it's no longer really about, whether you're a master of your field, industry, or, politics. It's not about that anymore. It's about your self-talk, your ability to dial down the distractions so that you can, in the moment when you have to focus, you only focus on the task. And when it comes to high performance, the real subtle shifts occur between good performance and great performance. The difference is those who can forget in the picture of performance themselves. So they're no longer self-focused. The self has actually disappeared from the frame. The only thing they're thinking about is the task. And so when you get to kind of superior performance, the kind of goals that you set up are not outcome goals. Oh, I want to hit that shot or putt that shot into, hit that shot in one. It's not about that anymore. It's about the process. So the process goal becomes, I'm going to approach that shot in a calm and relaxed state. I'm going to consciously take a moment to ensure that I get into a relaxed state. So whatever cues I need to give myself to trigger that relaxation response, I will work on those cues. Some people have words, some people have images, some people channel feelings to instantly get their physiology into a more relaxed state. When I approach that shot, I'm going to drop my shoulders. I'm going to clear my mind. I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to filter out every bit of background noise there is. That's how you get into those moments of truly extra performance from what's already very high performance. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that, yeah, I've heard, similar things before as well, where let's not focus on the outcomes of what we're doing. Let's focus on doing it the best way we can, or having the right process, and then the outcome will just take care of itself. I think that is really cool. Absolutely. And I wonder as well, how do you do that in your or in your own life with these processes? Are there any sort of rituals that you have to extract that high performance out of yourself?
Yeah, look, so personally, I've been on a long journey, kind of deliberate and conscious cultivation of self-awareness. And so what that means is, when we are trying to do anything, whether it's be in conversation with somebody else or do something that's maybe challenging us or maybe difficult, we kind of can go into the default state is we get frustrated, we get annoyed, we get, all these thoughts or feelings emerge that actually are counterproductive to what we want to do, or counterproductive to allowing the best part of ourselves to be, expressed. So that journey of self-awareness is like a muscle that you build where you notice what's shifting and changing. Oh, I feel that frustration rising. Oh, I feel I'm getting defensive in this conversation. You know, this skill of almost becoming yourself as an external entity, right? You sort of side yourself. And so as you notice those things, you develop tools and skills to help yourself stay in a neutral space of curiosity. Oh, I'm getting frustrated in this conversation or in this experience. I wonder what that's about. And so you stay more open to information and cues in your relationships, in your working life. It helps you also go, I've taken on this work and I should have known that this, and this about it aren't things that actually, well with me. So
Hmm.
it's this hyper awareness where you become far more attuned to noticing your own ego and keeping it in a place where it doesn't get control of your reactions and your defensiveness so that you can get more information, you can make more conscious choices. And from that, you can sort of stay aligned. Okay, so I'm going to say no to this. It's okay to say no to this. Or, this person's telling me something really important. I need to actually be open to this and listen because I can learn something. And so you don't approach life in this, I need to be right and I need to know. You approach it more from I don't know everything and that's okay. It doesn't make any statement about me being inferior or lesser than. They're all the kind of judgments of the ego. In fact, if I can stay in a state of openness and curiosity, I can probably gather more information to help me to keep shoring up a foundation of feeling confident, good about myself, aligned with what my values are, using my strengths. So self awareness as a journey and as a tool is the bedrock of how you operate in your personal life, the bedrock of great leadership. It's the bedrock of creating high performing teams. It's that process.
Hmm. Yeah, that's cool. And are there any ways that you like? Do you think you've always been self-aware, or has it been something that you've improved at over time? And if so, how did you actually do that? Was it something like, did you meditate or like journal or any of those things, or did it just come with experience where, as you did more things, you kind of realized I feel this certain way because of this situation and things like that?
Definitely meditated on and off throughout my life. There are, times when it just falls away. Back to my comment about, it's come and they're there for a time and they're there for a purpose and then they naturally move away and then you come back to them. I think for everyone, the opportunity to be self-aware and increase your self-awareness is there. For me, I would say that my self-awareness leaps. I sort of decided to go and study psychology. So before that, the leaps in self-awareness always came through crisis or some setback or some challenge or disappointment. And so rather than glossing over or staying in anger or avoiding thinking about those experiences, I would dive into them and look around because, I'd always believed, dark cloud has a silver lining and I'd go looking for the silver lining. And if you
Mm.
do look, it is there. There is always some learning, often about yourself, you can incorporate. And if you take that with you, then, you start to build up your own kind of interior side about yourself, about who you like, what you don't, what your values are, who you want to be, what things you want to avoid. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's really cool. And I heard this analogy recently, and this guy was talking about requiring deeper roots so that the tree can grow higher. And certainly resonate with that idea where going through those challenges or setbacks allows you to kind of polish the diamond almost through that pressure and then to grow even further. I think that's really cool. I want to ask you too, do you consider yourself, I know you've had this really successful career and it is incredible the things that you've done and you continue to do. But Like yourself, do you consider yourself to be a high performer?
Guess my answer to that is when it comes to performance, you need to take yourself out of the picture in some sort of way. So the way I kind of view myself and life and how I approach it is through this lens of what is it that I want to do. And once I determined what direction I want to go in or what task I want to take on or what new thing I want to move towards, then I set up within myself the goals that are really what I call kind of mastery goals. I want to do this and I want to get really good at it. And so rather than being focused on achieving a title or a promotion or an outcome, I get really focused on in the days when I was working in investment banking career, my corporate career, um, my goals were about building really good relationships. Like that's what really mattered to me. And in every way, doing things that helped my clients, served my clients, ensured that I was a very trusted partner for them, was in integrity. Those were the things that I set up. Whatever came of that, came of that. I set up goals, process goals for me where I wanted to put in the extra hour at the end of the day to review things, to write up, report, to consolidate my thinking. It would have been easy to just head home at that point in time. But so it's those sorts of things rather than, this is where I'm going and this is aiming for, I never aimed for a specific outcome. It's really aimed to do a really, really good job based on what mattered to me. So, and I was never, a very competitive field. A lot of people get caught up in this, working advisory world, with relationships you own. There's this whole idea of owning a relationship. And I always found that a bit attractive. You own a relationship, you have a relationship, and you invest in a relationship, and you will support a relationship. And if there is something of value in there, that will be recognized. So, I was trying to take the ego and in ego, it's fear, right? So there's this fear of, oh my God, I've got to make sure that this person sitting at this firm who is in this position of power likes me. And so when you're coming from a place of ego, there's a lot of fear behind making sure that person likes you. And of course, in the finance industry, there's lots of, pony tricks of restaurants and bars. And, it's a big expense account that you're usually allowed to sort of, build relationships. And anything was that I was quite reluctant always in that way. It's not to say that we didn't take clients out for lunch or up and have a great night or whatever. We did, but I think all my clients knew that just wasn't really how I wanted to build our relationship. They were byproducts of already having a good, you know, mutual respect for one another. Always had to focus on having some genuineness there. If I was building a relationship, I'd always look for something in that person I really liked and could respect and relate to, so that when I was dealing with them, I was coming from a place of authenticity in dealing with them, rather than, oh, you've got a really important job and, I need to make you like me. Just, I don't know if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. No, it definitely does. And I think it's almost similar to what you were talking about with the goals versus processes. Like, let's not try and I'm going to be friends with this person. Like, let's focus on that. I'm going to be a nice person. I'm going to do things the right way. And as a result, we'll have a good relationship. Not trying to go straight to it all. I think that's really cool. Is there anything anything like that relationship building or other things that you've learned from your time in investment banking that you use in your practice or just in your general life today?
Gosh, that's a good question. I mean, look, I'm sure there are, so it was an outstanding time in my life and time that it was right for me to be there. I loved it. And something that I learned from it about myself more so is I really like to work in a way that's dynamic. I like to work in a way where the days are unscripted. So when I turn up, I don't really know what the day's going to have, but I get to respond to it and meet it. And so I like to work in a way that's quite stimulating that way, in that dynamic respect. I realize that I work best when I have a lot of autonomy rather than being told what to do. So I always ended up going for ended up, I didn't know this at the time, but the roles where I really excelled and roles that I loved were where it was a blank slate. And I got to, within the parameters of what was expected of that role, just decide how it would be played out. So when it comes to, career now as an executive coach, same thing plays out. When I sit down with a client, I'm not starting a session with them in any scripted way, have some vague ideas about been talking about these things. It might be helpful to now move in this direction. But that's a very loosely held plan because I really have to be so present in the moment to whatever's coming at me. And it may just be that they've had something completely unexpected unfold in their world. And so I'm meeting them in that moment of, wow, okay, what is this? We need to look at this and what is happening for them and what might be the best responses that they can make. So it's extremely dynamic. So learned that even in the world of investment banking, stockbroking, and even when I was a research analyst, I loved deep thinking. I loved being an analyst. I loved exploring, love relationship building. Like I actually really do love it. So that carries into what I'm doing now. Like I really enjoy building those trusted, trust-based relationships. And I'm genuinely curious about people. Even when I was working in banking, like the deal and whatever was happening, or whatever was going on in the market at the time, I loved, very interesting and gripping. But I enjoyed understanding why, and this is what kind of got me interested in leadership. Whether it was, amongst my clients as fund managers or amongst the companies that were clients of the fund that we might have been making some kind of transaction for. I was really fascinated to see what were the differentiating components of what made a good leader. Why? And I would always be interested to see how other people responded, particularly to a CEO or a CFO that were, in their rounds trying to sell an IPO, for example. Fascinating to see which people responded positively and well to certain people that displayed qualities and characteristics versus those that didn't. Because ultimately, every investor is answering that question, can I back this girl guy? And, all these subtle things that we do when we're sizing somebody up to work out reliable, are they good at what they do? Can they deliver this? They solve problems? And I actually place in the context of large sums of money, my faith in this person delivering this outcome. So those things kind of still apply to what I do because I'm still looking at that in terms of, as executives that have that gravitas and have that ability to deliver. And it always comes down to self-awareness, always. Those that actually have their measure, that know themselves well, that know what they can promise, those that I'm really hoping, a real difference between kind of, I hope this sounds good, but inwardly there's not this really rock solid foundation versus those that are coming from such a solid place of kind of knowing what they can deliver, even within a very fluid external environment.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that those lessons that you take and are really cool and that you take them into your personal life now, I think is amazing. I've got one last question for you today, Lydia, and that is a question that I ask every guest. And it is, if you were graduating university again, starting in the workforce right now or this year, what are some tips, some advice that you would give yourself?
The advice would be that you really do need to take the pressure off yourself from any expectation of having an answer today of what you need to do. or should do, because inevitably you will probably start out doing something and find yourself even, 15, 20 years down the track doing something completely different. So you don't have to have it all figured out. I think it's important to also understand your own kind of true nature. In other words, people pursue that. I'm just going to do what feels right, what I'm interested in. And that's a great place to start. And others are a little bit more strategic. Well, I'm going to go over here because these fields have kind of leading fields in terms of, economy, and, they pay well and all those things. So all I would say is wherever you're being led in your thinking process, it's an indicator of what you value and what's important to you. And so you need to listen to that. And as long as you're not only doing things because you think you're going to get some financial reward, and, you just follow what it is that, inner voice is telling you want to do, because it will lead to something else that leads to something else that leads to something else that leads to something else. And there's no wrong turn, because you're accumulating knowledge and experience. The wrong turn is when you do something that has no interest, no appeal, does not light you up, does not in any way stimulate you. That's your wrong turn, and you need to be thinking about doing something else. I had that wrong turn very quickly in my career. It was my first job out of university. I was working law firm and thought that I was going to pursue a career in law. And within 3 months was going home, and I had that feeling of, it was a dead feeling. I knew I can't do this. When I kind of told friends and family that I was, aborting that mission, they thought I was absolutely mad. I was like, can't. You just finished law degree, got a great job with a great firm. You can't do that. And I'm like, no, I definitely am doing that. That is not the right direction for me. And because I knew, I went home and I answered myself the question, if I don't want the partner's job, not in any kind of, Machiavellian sense, but just in an aspirational context, if I don't want the partner's job, then I've got nothing to aim for here. I can't process steps don't make sense to me. So I need to go find something else that, and the differentiator was me, the dynamism, the different every day, the unscripted way to work didn't exist for me in that role. And it existed in what I went on to do. And so it's that really, have to be stockbroking. No, it could have been anything that allowed me to have that unscripted, more dynamic, autonomous way of working.
Wow, and that is really cool, and certainly the theme that through this whole podcast has been, listening to your gut, having that self-awareness about things that you're interested in, paths you want to go down. And like you were saying, it's not necessarily that there's one path that would get you those feelings and that end result. There's many ways to get to that feeling of wholeness and that feeling of satisfaction. So, look, I think we'll end the podcast there today. But thank you so much, Lidia. That has been a fascinating conversation and so much value in there, I think, for the listeners today.
Thanks so much, James. It's been a pleasure.